Hi, everyone. Welcome to Communicating Research for Impact. Today's presentation, Using Social Media to Share Your Research. I will be your host. My name is Andrea Gallegos, and I manage the University of Utah Health Research social media accounts. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded. I also want to note we're focusing today on how to use social media effectively to support your research, grow your network, and reach different audiences. This is a great chance to hear directly from researchers who have really figured out how to make their work stand out online. So please drop your questions in the chat anytime during the workshop. We'll try to get to them as we go on, or we will circle back during the Q&A portion. Next slide. Okay, so we have two remaining workshops left. July 17th, we have Media Savvy Researcher, How to Navigate Interviews with Julie Kiefer. And we have Giving a Great Presentation, Kyle Wheeler, on August 14th. To register for these upcoming workshops or view past recordings, you can scan the QR code or we will drop the link in the chat. Next slide. Okay, today's presentation, we will have a quick overview with some housekeeping items, and then we will get into some fun questions with our panelists. We will also leave some time for questions at the end. Next slide. All right, the importance of digital presence and why social media for research. Sharing your research matters more than ever. As a science communicator or a researcher, a strong online presence helps you reach beyond fellow scientists. It boosts visibility, sparks new collaborations, connects with the broader audiences, and builds your personal and organizational brand. When you translate your science into clear, useful messages, you make it more accessible and expand its impact, showing that together we're advancing science for the benefit of everyone. Next slide. Okay, so before we meet our speakers, let's quickly go over a few important guidelines and resources to make sure we all stay compliant. The links on the slide have info regarding privacy concerns. That means honoring photo requests, removing any identifying info, and making sure we have the right permissions in place. The U also has protocols on capturing visuals in labs, so that would be a good one to take a look at. The VPR has provided a quick guide for University of Utah leaders and researchers titled Empowering You to Speak Confidently and Responsibly About the Research. We also have a best practices for managing your personal account. As we all know, social media isn't private. Even posts you think are limited can be shared, copied, or show up in search results. And if you're mentioning your role at the U, be clear that you're speaking for yourself, not on the behalf of the university. So a simple disclaimer in your bio, like, these views are my own, really does go a long way. I want to strongly encourage everyone to view these social media guidelines and make sure all involved parties are protected. And we will send the slide deck out and the links will be shared at the end of this presentation. Next slide. All right, now for the fun part. Let's meet the panelists. We've got a fantastic group with us today, and I'm so excited for you to hear their insights. To kick things off, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and share the moment or the reason social media became worth their time professionally. Let's start with you, Dr. Clement Chow, and then we'll go down the line.
Hi, happy to be here. My name is Clement Chow. I'm an associate professor in human genetics. Um, my lab works on rare diseases, and a lot of my work interfaces with the public and foundations and the families we work with. So, social media is a really great way for me to get that work out to the public, which is what matters most for our work. Um, and And I guess that's kind of the main drive of why we use social media. I don't know if there's a single moment. Maybe there is a single moment. I don't know. But I was already using social media before my big moment, so so um, but I think primarily it's our work is so public facing that we like to make sure that the people who have the highest stakes in our science hear about it before even before it's published. So
Great. Brian Jones?
Hi, my name is Brian Jones. I'm a professor of ophthalmology and visual sciences. And I've been sort of online since the BBS days. So when social media started sort of emerging, it was kind of a natural extension. We used it for a lot of sort of organizing. We organized meetings. We recruited graduate students and postdocs through social media. You know, there've been a few moments that have been fun. We think the world's first online textbook with web vision, and so we in the vision research community we promoted that through social media. My research group studies neural circuitry and how neural circuitry breaks in disease. And we were pioneers in the space called connectomics. And connectomics started emerging when social media started coming about, and it's this sort of massively collaborative kind of community. And so it was easy to sort of use social media to reach out and connect with others. And like I said, organize conferences. And yeah, it's been interesting to see platforms come and go over the years. But you know, the interesting thing of the science community, they'll typically follow the platform, you know, the newly emergent platform. So for a while, there was a platform through Google called Orchid that sort of came and went. Google never really understood social media. Science, it seemed, never really organized on Facebook. The science community sort of exploded around Twitter back in the day, and that was kind of interesting. And then when Twitter imploded, most of science seems to have moved to Blue Sky. So it's been interesting watching sort of the progression and flow of social media. But in general, you know, it's an amazing tool for building community, and that's what we've used it for.
Should I just go ahead? Okay, sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything. Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name's Kristen Kwan. I'm happy to be here today. I'm an associate professor also in human genetics. I'm also an adjunct in ophthalmology and visual sciences, where Brian is. And so I would say that for me, I don't know if I came at social media slightly differently than the others, but I started my account on Twitter in about 2010, beginning of 2011. And it was really, at the time, meant to be for me to be able to follow football. So I historically have been a big football fan. That's where the name Block in the Back came. I actually wrote, when I was in grad school, a college football blog. And at the time, Twitter was really kind of one of the best ways to follow sporting events kind of in real time. And so, of course, this is a hobby. I have a research lab. I'm an associate professor, and my research lab studies development and morphogenesis of the early eye. And really, what we're trying to understand are mechanisms and really genetic causes of blindness. And so, as I was getting into Twitter and following football, of course, I was starting to see a lot of science Twitter emerging. And there was already some science Twitter in place around early 2011 when I became more active. And really, it was as I started to find more and more people that I suddenly realized that this could be a really great way for us to share our science. And the work that we do is sort of foundational, fundamental research. But again, it's addressing genetic causes of visual impairment and blindness. So there's obviously a lot we can do in terms of trying to communicate this to the public and to a wider audience. And so as I got more involved, I started following folks in the science community. And it turns out that a lot of the work that I do and my lab does is very visual. So we do a lot of live imaging. And we sort of joke that we make movies for a living. And so that has been a great way to get people's attention by posting movies. And so I moved over to Blue Sky last fall and transferred all of my Twitter tweets for, since 2011, 2010, all the way to Blue Sky. And so we have started up a presence there. And I also work in the zebrafish community, which has a very strong social media and community presence as well. And so it's been a really great place for us to both share our research, but also be outwardly facing. And because I have multiple interests and kind of have different communities that I work in, not just the science community, but also, for example, in sports. This is a way for some of the public people who aren't scientists to also see some of the work that we do, especially in the context of the movies that we make, because they're fun to watch. Honestly, at least I think so. So that's a little bit about me and how I got started.
Great, thank you for those introductions. And I liked hearing you say that you transferred all your tweets over to Blue Sky. That's a interesting tactic to move over. So let's dig into some questions about platforms and strategy. Let's start with, in what ways, and this is kind of building off your intros, but in what ways has social media expanded the reach of your research? And we'll start with you, Dr. Brian Jones, this time.
Yeah, so it's been kind of crazy. Watching social media explode in communities that are not necessarily aligned with our area of expertise. One of the cool things about social media is that you're able to tap into additional communities within science that you might never read, but you get to know people, and they share information with you, and they share exciting work that their students are doing, or papers in completely disparate fields that sometimes have relevance to something that you're interested in scientifically, sometimes not, but it's just a really cool read. A friend of mine who works in government started sending me papers on concrete, Roman marine concrete, and how concrete poured by the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago was stronger now than it was then, and it actually kicked off this amazing sort of discussion, and we started plugging people into our other networks, people that we knew, and that turned out to be a really exciting thing for him. So social media is kind of fun that way, in that you don't necessarily know where it's going to go, and sometimes it's certainly beneficial scientifically. Like a colleague of mine down the hall, when he first showed up, said that he needed a postdoc. And he said, how do I get one? And I said, well, typically you advertise, but we could make a post on social media, and literally 24 hours later he had a postdoc. So there's an element of unpredictability that can cut both ways, but yeah, it's fun to expand networks that you think you have, and networks that are completely unpredictable, but are also fun.
That's great insight, Clement. Kristen, do you have anything to add?
What was the question again?
In what ways has social media expanded the reach of your research? And I will add, Clement, I read a lot about your work through social media when I first joined the U, so it's expanded to a non-science audience right here.
Well, I mean, yeah, so primarily Twitter was the way I was using social media before. But that's I'm not really on that anymore. And I guess Blue Sky exists and I'm on there, but I don't really use it because it's just a circular bad news now, so I don't really want to be on there. But actually I'm probably one of the few academics that uses LinkedIn quite a bit, and it's been really helpful for the rare disease communities we work with, because we work directly with the foundations and we do a lot of drug screening. Every time we have news, I put it on there, and it basically gets the engagement of a ton of different rare disease foundations I've never heard of, and then we get emails about, about working together almost after every post I put. Um, so, it's there there are there are different ways to use different the different platforms, and it turns out that for LinkedIn is what the rest of the world uses outside of academia. And so it's actually a really great way to reach people. I'm actually not so concerned about reaching scientists with my work. They'll find it. I don't really care. But it's the outside world that matters, and I find that LinkedIn really works that way.
That's great. We love to use LinkedIn as well. It reaches quite a bit of audience. It's pretty broad. Kristen, do you have anything to add?
I don't have much to add. I would say that I guess when Twitter was there was a lot of active science being posted on Twitter, and then now on Blue Sky, even though I agree with Clement that there's a lot of sort of bad news going around Blue Sky, there's still a lot of people posting science. And so I would say that in some ways, in terms of how social media has expanded research, it's really actually what I've been exposed to. And in some ways, I get interesting ideas from things that I might not necessarily have come across. So maybe a little bit similar to what Brian was saying. Because so people are posting off of, like bioarchive posts and walking them, people through papers. And that gets me thinking in ways that I might not have expected. And so in some ways that helps to expand the research in my lab. And that's a little bit different than the reach of what we're doing to other people, but I like that there's another forum that I can get ideas. So
Great. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add that, I mean, it is true that that on certain platforms there is a lot of bad news because there's a lot of bad news going around and people are upset. And they're using, these forums as a way to share and sort of commiserate, if you will. But, I think the other important thing, particularly with social media, is how you design who you pay attention to, right? So who you follow, particularly on Blue Sky, since there's no algorithm involved, who you follow basically is how you're tuning your antenna to get the information that appears in your feed. And historically, if you've used the platform to sort of help promote other people's work, and help promote the students in your lab, help promote the trainees, help promote your colleagues, it helps to like sort of curate a better, sort of more inclusive, happier, sort of more informative community, and can help cut through some of the noise. If you follow a lot of political accounts, yeah, it's going to be politics and it's going to be bad news, but a lot of there's a lot of good people out there posting a lot of good science too.
Thank you for that feedback. I just want to remind the audience to please post questions in the chat. And I also would like to ask the audience before we move on, can you share what has been your biggest motivation or even hesitation in using social media? I think we can kind of all gain some insights from how we're all feeling with that. Um, and now I just want to go a little bit more deeper into the content you're publishing and how you decide to put it on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and how you share it, what's different about it, and the tactics that are involved in that. We can start with you, Kristen.
okay, let's see. So first I'll say that I'm not particularly active on LinkedIn. I have an account and I'm using it actually to help build communities, for example, at the university. So some years ago, for example, so I'm the director of the developmental biology training grant here, which is a T32 training program. And some years ago, the trainees asked to have a way to interface with the history of trainees that we've had. We're in our 27th year of funding. And so we have a large kind of alum population who are in all walks of life. And so we built a LinkedIn group to help connect people so that when they're appointed to the training grant, they now have kind of a built-in network that they can start interacting with alums. So besides that, I'm not super active on LinkedIn. So in terms of what I post on Blue Sky, I will post our own science. It is my personal account also, and so I will post, family things. I will post, my own interact. I guess one thing I will say is that I don't come from a particularly scientific family, and so one thing that has become very apparent to me over the last 6 months or so is that a lot of people, I think, aren't aware of the challenges facing the scientific community right now. So I actually think it is important, when we see some of this challenging news that's been coming out in terms of funding and many other things, to amplify some of these things, because I do have a reach that's not just scientists. And I make a point to try to talk about it with family members and people who aren't aware of the kinds of things that we're facing. So I will post articles. Obviously we have to vet the sources and things like that and make sure that we stand behind, I personally would stand behind what I'm reposting. But I think that in this sort of climate right now, it's important for me not only to post science and celebrate, whatever wins we have in our lab, um, but also in addition to amplify some of the challenges that we're facing, because this is an opportunity for us. Um, I guess that would be kind of the baseline of how I think about it.
Thank you for sharing. Brian or Clement, do you want to chime in?
I can go. Um, I guess for me, the most, this is not referring to either person on this call, but especially after what Kristen just said. But for me, the most boring science accounts are the ones that only share science, right? Where the poster doesn't come out as a person on the account, and they're always just talking about science. Um, maybe that's all they have. I don't know. But it's really boring to just read about science when I'm not like thinking about science, and so I actually prefer to follow accounts that are more personal, right? That you happen to have a paper that comes out. Let's post that. But what is 90% of other things that are happening? Let's hear about it. And so I tend to post like that as well. Kristen and Brian could probably attest to that. And I think that makes it more exciting. I think that a lot of that is now not happening on Blue Sky. Um, and so that's part of like the joy that's kind of lost from Blue Sky for me at least, is that a lot of that just doesn't happen anymore. And like Kristen, I follow a lot more than just scientists on these different platforms. And the thing I noticed most was that the only people that moved to Blue Sky were the academics. And so like it's like you just kind of all the kind of exciting non-science stuff just stayed on X, Twitter, and so that was kind of a weird space. But for LinkedIn, it's a little bit of a different platform, right? If you want to to get a laugh, you should go to the subreddit, LinkedIn Lunatics, and see some of the crazy stuff that people post on LinkedIn. Really funny, but but I don't endorse it. But LinkedIn is more of a professional networking site, right? And it gets, and because everyone outside of academia is on it, it actually has a pretty big reach. I think a much bigger reach than Twitter or Blue Sky ever had. So I will post stuff about one of our drug screen successes, right? Or maybe a piece that Julie wrote about our work, and I'll post it, and then all of a sudden, my financial manager has like reshared it, and it's gone out to like a million other people, and it just gets this totally different reach that I can't replicate anywhere else, and I think that that's really really useful in terms of our science, at least. But in terms of outside of LinkedIn, I think posting about you, whatever that is makes it a little bit more exciting. If I wanted to just read science, I just read a paper. So
Yeah, I think Clement's point is really important there, right? On following accounts that are authentic, that are sort of a mix of personal and professional because it's really sort of about the community and yeah, it was a bummer to have Twitter sort of implode, but I think it's also important to realize how long Twitter had been around, right? So when I canceled my Twitter account and deleted my tweets, I deleted 18 years of tweets, right? So Twitter was almost 20 years old by the time it started collapsing. And one of the things that made it magic in the early days was that you started getting these communities that would start self-assembling on the platform. So like Black Twitter was one of the first Twitter communities that showed up. And then there was, photography Twitter, and there was Twitter, military Twitter, and science Twitter sort of came to the platform almost like 7 or 8 years into the platform's existence. And so a lot of those communities are now starting to like refine themselves and reform on other platforms. And it's going to take a little time, but the right way to sort of use these platforms is define community, and then help promote that community. They're amazing platforms to create community and create the kinds of environments and curate the kinds of people that you want to work with and you want to talk with. Like I met people through some social media that have ended up being like truly like wonderful colleagues and friends that I don't actually work with, but are friends, some of whom I've never met in person. But it's been a very rewarding experience. And again, sometimes you don't know where these experiences come from, right? And you don't know. It's kind of like science in that way. You can't like presuppose what you think the outcome is going to be. You have to put some effort into it. You have to put some investment in it, and then magic happens. And yeah, that would be my sort of response to that.
Okay, and just as a follow-up question, I'm hearing that you all enjoy profiles that have a variety of professional and personal. But what advice would you give to the researcher who doesn't really want to share their personal life? Where's the line? Where's the balance?
Well, I mean, you don't have to.
Yeah, I
It's
think
just
that's
for you. But I probably won't be that interested. But but that it's what you want to get out of it, right? So what Brian said, you get what you put into it. You'll find that science community, but that's probably all you'll get out of it. And that's fine if that's what you want.
I think it's so personal, right? I mean, I think it just depends on what that person cares about. And like, for example, I'm not necessarily posting a lot of pictures of my kids or something, but if I have, I mean, I love food. And if I have some dish in front of me that I'm really excited about, I'll post that. And that's not science, right? So I think it's just really personal. And you don't have to be necessarily, you know, I think wherever you feel comfortable with where your line of privacy is, I think you can still share things that maybe don't breach whatever you're not comfortable with. So,
And sometimes it's not necessarily about sharing things. I mean, I have friends who are on social media purely to lurk. I also have friends who work in careers where they really can't share anything from their professions, for lots and lots of good reasons. I've got a very dear friend who works in the intelligence community, and he can't talk about anything he does. But he lurks, and we comment on, he has cats and he posts cat pictures, and we talk about food and things like that. But that's a relationship that we've maintained for 2 decades. Just it's a way just to like keep in touch with people. So yeah, but he hardly ever posts anything personal.
That is all great advice. Kyle, do we have any questions from the audience?
There is a great question in the chat from Rebecca who asks if you want to reach as wide of a layperson audience as possible, what social media platforms do you recommend focusing on?
It's this is a bit tricky now. In the past, I would have said Twitter or X. The problem with a lot of the algorithms, the platforms now is that there's algorithms. And so when Elon Musk changed the algorithm on Twitter, there are a couple of professional accounts that I do run, one for International Society for Eye Research and one for Web Vision, the world's first online textbook. And after the algorithmic switch, we'd make a post from the Web Vision account or the ICER account. And before the switch, we'd reach 20,000 views or 30,000 views per post. After the algorithmic switch, it went to 20 views. That unless you wanted to pay them money to rank you in the algorithm, so that immediately became a dead platform. Facebook is again same sort of problem. You pay to have your content ranked. Instagram is same platform. It's a meta platform, and it's actually gotten very difficult with the recent algorithmic changes to propagate information out there. Again, unless you're paying. I think my answer to that would be everything is sort of in flux right now. Blue Sky is an open standard. The community is building. Clement has really good points on Instagram. I think my answer is it's going to depend upon what you want out of it. If you want professional reach, if you want to make, professional connections, LinkedIn probably is a good platform. If you're looking to build community, right now, maybe Blue Sky.
Clement or Kristen, did you want to weigh in?
I'll just add that I think part of it is what do you feel comfortable using? I see that there's suggestions. I think Julie just posted about Instagram or YouTube and TikTok. I don't have a TikTok account. I feel too old to do that. That seems more like what my kids are doing. Instagram, I set up an account, but it never quite took. So, I think it partly just depends on what you feel comfortable using. And then again, like Brian said, what your goal is. So I think there are ways to reach a lot of people on many platforms now. And in some ways, it's a blessing and a curse, right? And so I think it's about the time investment that you're able to make and what you feel comfortable doing. So.
Jane asks an adjacent question and speaking to kind of a layperson audience in how do you try to kind of keep your messages easy to digest on social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, Clement was about to. Do you want to talk first?
No,
We'll
it's fine.
actually
Go
get
ahead.
to that question in just a few minutes. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay.
But
But I
thank you
see,
for asking. It's a good question.
I think Cindy had a hand raised. I don't know if we want to do that. Sorry, it's just I
Sure.
saw a hand.
Yes, I'm faster speaking than I am typing because I'm old enough. I see a lot of people asking questions about timeliness, and me too. So a lot of my research, although it is very interesting to social people that I talk to, I ride horses with people who are not scientists, and we talk about this, and they get really excited about it. But I'm very worried that my research is really probably, let's say, at least 10 years out. And the whole thing about you never know if your research is right, how do we communicate that level of uncertainty and the level of, this isn't going to be a thing for a decade or more? How do we communicate that effectively? And I don't want scientists to be like, oh, hey, I saw this great thing. And then, well, I haven't seen that at my doctor's office this year or next year, so these guys must not know what they're talking about. How do we navigate that?
This is actually really, really important and something that we've chatted about in certain circles repeatedly, in that one of the problems of social media are these hype circles, right? So people will come out with something, and and in the scientific community, historically, we've been rather conservative with our claims, right? We use a lot of language like may, we use a lot of language like might, we use a lot of sort of, like projections and thinking, but are careful to sort of constrain that. Not everybody works that way. And there have been a lot of science projects that have been driven by hype, and they've done damage to the community. And the problem happens when you make these outrageous claims, and then people have expectations, and funding derives. The best way to fund science is through publicly funded initiatives, taxpayer funded initiatives, right? Through National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, DOE, mechanisms like this, but it has to have taxpayer support. And so this is a bigger conversation. We could probably have an entirely separate discussion just on this. But yeah, you're absolutely right. How do you start pushing things forward in a way that doesn't inappropriately hype the content? And I think just engaging in the conversation is a great way to do it. One of the ways that started on Twitter and has now gone to Blue Sky is that people will do these threaded narratives, right? So they'll start out and they'll post their paper, and they'll post like a figure or an animated GIF or a video, and then they'll go down and do a thread of discussion about all the implications. And it's a kind of a fun way to walk people through a paper when it comes out. But yeah, how to deal with hype cycles is a really, really good question.
I would love some guidance on that, because this is a major reason that I haven't used social media.
Yeah.
LinkedIn is not really social media. It's
Yeah.
mostly professional. So, I'm in a professional place. It's no big deal. But I lived through cold fusion.
Yes, same here. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be
Yeah.
I don't want to be a cold fusion. And
Yeah.
but yet I'm doing work that is very interesting, that my friends are very interested in, and
Yeah.
I feel it would be reasonable to share it, because it would, again, people need to know what is happening with NSF and NIH and why. Hey, the fact that I can't fund my PhD students next year to do this work that you might like done is a serious problem. I want to write that, but I'm hesitant.
Yeah. This is part of the thing that makes, I think it's important when you wade into social media, not to focus on who follows you. I think the right way to do it is to find accounts that you find interesting, and then follow the people that they follow, and start building a community and interacting with those people, and build this community that people will then that you start interacting with. And then when you publish something or when they publish something, there's sort of a bi-directional amplification and a discussion around this. And oftentimes that'll sort of naturally dovetail into bigger conversations that people are having. So for instance, with trainees, all the trainee budgets being cut in the last 6 months have been devastating. We're risking the next generation of scientists. We're risking the next generation of physicians and nurses and technicians. Everybody that's come through all the last 6 students that have come through my lab have been funded off diversity initiatives, and they are now all in medical school and nursing school. And so, where's that next generation going to come from? These are wider conversations that I think once you wade in with your experiences, will start dovetailing with others and amplify it. And then it starts, depending on who you follow and who they follow, it'll start bridging out into the wider media.
Can I say something? So I would also challenge that um a little hype is okay, right? Like unless you feel your science is boring enough that you can't hype it at all. Like it's hype, right? The one of the reasons why we are in the situation we are is because no one knows what we're doing, right? And if you're just going to tell us about your Western blot or that graph on that paper, who cares, right? Like even other scientists don't care. So it's you got to find out how what is the exciting part of your research that you need to tell people about. You need to tell them about that. Hype it. Tell them why this is interesting, why you're doing it. You can do it without promising things. There's more than one way to write a sentence. So it's really it's really I think it's actually really important to hype science a little bit, especially in today's publishing world where everything is reviewed out of your paper, right? Like you just write your paper according to your reviewer, not according to what you actually think is happening. Well, that's what I do. But that's how you get things published today, and discussions and introductions don't always reflect what you actually thought is really happening. So I think it's really important that when you have control over the message to message it
I,
strongly. I mean, yeah.
I think the one thing I would add is that based on the kind of work that we do in my lab, because it's very visual, I like to show movies and I like to say this could allow us to try to understand genetic causes of blindness, right? And so that's why we need continued funding. So it's less about a specific result and more about the approach that we can take. And so we try to convey that this is a long-term pursuit, but now we've developed methods that will allow us to see things that other people have never been able to see, right? So we can hype the approach while not having a translatable result yet. So that's sort of one way that I try to get people excited about the kinds of things we're doing. Um, yeah. And that is in itself a bit of hype, but it's not about a specific result or something that's going to end up in a clinic right away. And I think personally, over the last few months, one thing that's been really amazing is watching kind of the Stand Up for Science community come together. And I think there's been really good messaging that's coming through, things like GLP-1 and, Gila monsters and, things that, some people might not think are quote unquote useful research, then turn into something that's huge and everyone knows Ozempic, right? And so I think sort of conveying these trajectories of how things do work is also really important right now.
And what platform are you using?
I'm mostly using Blue Sky,
Okay.
and I was on Twitter until last fall.
Okay, that is great content. So kind of building on to giving a little bit more of like a takeaway, how do you explain your complex topics in an accessible way? And what type of content has really, taken off? Is it ones that you've shared with video, timing, tagging, visuals, just some kind of little takeaways from how you are sharing your content?
I mean, I can start just picking up just where I was speaking before. Really, my work is very visual, and so it's movies. And I think that has been particularly effective. And then in terms of how to explain the concepts, I really it's a lot of it is honestly practice with having talked about it with my family because I don't come from a scientific family. And so, if I show something to my mom or my dad, they're like, "Oh, that's nice," right? But it's incumbent upon me to say why we do this and what we might be able to get out of it. And I kind of didn't appreciate how important that was to have that kind of constant I'm explaining this to someone who has no biology background. And it really has come in handy. And I'll say, for example, the movies are the things that have helped me a lot. And I don't know, I think what Clement probably knows this. A year ago, last March, a bunch of us were on a plane to a genetics meeting in DC, a whole bunch of people from the U. And it was a Tuesday, I believe, that we were all flying out. And so it turned out that all of the representatives from the state of Utah were on the plane as well. And I ended up seated next to Blake Moore. And I I recognized him. He's not my representative, but I recognized him and I thought, well, he's stuck next to me for the next 3 hours and 45 minutes. I have to take advantage of this opportunity. So I went right to I pulled my iPad out and started showing him movies and talked about what we did and that there were a lot of geneticists on the plane from the U and that, I study, genetic causes of blindness, right? And, that this was not a partisan issue. And I hope that we could count on his support for science funding. And so it's that kind of, I just distill out the message to be as, fundamental as possible, which is also the truth. Um, and so I think just talking to more and more people outside of science is helpful. And again, like I said, I started social media, and my communities were really different, right? So I have a whole bunch of sports people who are not scientists also. And so explaining to them, and I've had them ask me a lot of questions, especially during COVID, for example. And even though I'm not a virologist, these are questions that I could help provide some insight into. And so I think just being able to talk outside of my work environment and doing that frequently has been important.
Yeah, I think it's just practice. Most of the talks I give now are to non-scientists, are to patient communities now. And it's the same, right? Don't show data. Don't show plots. Don't show immunohistochemistry figures that require you to see the overlap of two small colors. Don't No one wants to see that. I don't want to see that. Um, so that I mean that's how you get the message across on these, short message um methods. You have to distill it down to the main point. And if you want to reach non-scientists, don't use science words, right? um, and it really is just down to practice and how do you convey this complex thing that you've done in a way that captures the hype, right? Because there is hype in your project. You capture the hype and but also don't immediately lose them, right? It's practice, but it's I also joined Twitter in like 2010. Um, so it does take practice, but it's easily doable. I think most scientists can do it. Um, it's not as scary as it seems to talk like a normal person.
And I think it does help to curate a diverse crowd of people that you chat with. So I've got a lot of people that I follow on Blue Sky who are not scientists, and but there's a genuine relationship there. And so when you say something or post something, it's not uncommon for them to post back or direct message me, what do you mean by this? Or so one of the things that we're looking at right now is we're stepping into neurodegeneration, which has implications for Alzheimer's and dementias of a number of kinds. And what will commonly happen is, so I have a friend in the State Department, for instance, who we posted a discussion that we were having on some of these proteinopathies that we were dealing with, and he wrote and he said, my mother's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Can you walk me through some of this? And that's led to this actually fairly large, extensive conversation in this space, and that helps me sort of refine my language and description, talking to a completely layperson who works in international policy, right? Who has no science chops, but that discussion back and forth, helps like clarify how I think of these complex issues in more tractable ways.
That's all good info. How do you guys deal with the negativity or the trolls online?
Sometimes I am one of them. No, sorry. Um, uh, no. I just ignore it. I mean, it's not for everyone, right? Like you just have to ignore it. Um, Block, I guess. I don't know how it is on Blue Sky, but just block it, ignore it.
Ignore.
Yeah. Um, on so Blue Sky started with a very aggressive policy early on. I see a comment from my friend David Priest just showed up. He's a super interesting person and a super interesting follow. He Blue Sky came up with a very aggressive block policy, right? So they have nuclear tools, so you can, if somebody's a troll. So my perspective on trolls is that if somebody comes into your mentions or somebody comes into your life that you literally had no idea who they were 30 seconds prior and they're injecting toxicity, block. Absolutely just block. And you have no obligation to anybody else in the world to debate them, to respond to manipulation. The best way to use social media is with people who are engaged for honest reasons and are on social media for discourse and interaction, not toxicity. So yeah, trolls block, absolutely.
Great answers. We are almost out of time, so I'm going to end with one more question before we get to the Q&A. What advice would you give scientists hesitant about sharing their work online?
Just do it.
I think have fun, right? I mean, I think we do what we do because we're really curious, we're really excited about what we do, and part of that is also sharing what we do. And I've had so much fun sharing science, not just with the scientific community, but with people whom I know through sports or food or other communities online. Um, I will say also, depending on, what you work on, one of the things that I think helped Blue Sky take off so quickly is that they have these starter packs. And so if you are in a particular area of research, you can see if there are quote unquote starter packs, and then you can follow everyone on the starter pack, and suddenly you are going to be seeing a bunch of work that you might be interested in. And so there are, for what I do, there are starter packs for vision science, there are starter packs for the zebrafish community, developmental biology. And so there's a lot of ways to interact and get started. And then you won't necessarily feel alone. You can see what people are doing with respect to the work that you're interested in, and then see where your comfort level is. Because again, that is a personal decision. But it is fun.
Yeah, I'll mirror both those points. Have fun at it. Just engage, be honest, be sincere, and absolutely have fun.
How much time a day are you spending on this?
Like 26 hours or uh I used to spend more time, but I don't know, it's just something that's just kind of in the background. I'm not like putting down an hour and say like I'm gonna spend an hour on this, whatever. It's just, you know, something you just do when you're not doing something else.
I don't post
It's got
every
to be
day.
spontaneous.
Yeah.
It's got to be spontaneous, right? Like a
Yeah.
little bit, right? Otherwise,
Yeah.
it gets to that boring level of just like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I don't post every day.
No.
I probably go on Blue Sky every day, but not for a ton of time. It's if I'm waiting for something else to happen, the 2 minutes before a meeting, I might open up Blue Sky and see where things are at. So I think it's possible to do social media without feeling like you're on it all the time. I think that's another thing is that you can decide how aggressively online you want to be. And I would encourage everyone to find their comfort level for that. And you can be very online or you can be not as online. And I think it's all personal choice.
There are accounts that exist solely to broadcast information, and I mean, and that's a fair way to use social media. Like, so there are news accounts and you know, the sole purpose of that is just to broadcast a news article, and there's no interaction, there's no bi-directional input from those accounts, and that's totally legitimate, and that's a very efficient way to broadcast information. You know, I find it's more rewarding for me to have the bi-directional interactions, and that means that there is more of a time commitment to it. But you know, I've probably been terminally online since 1984, literally, with the first BBSs. So it's part of you know, my existence. But I have really good friends that, you know, will get on social media for 20 minutes in the morning, and that's their entire, you know, interaction. But we still interact over those 20 minutes.
That's all great. We only have a few minutes left. So Kyle, do we have any questions from the audience?
I think if I could synthesize a number of questions that have shown up, there's a theme of connection. I think, Brian, you kind of addressed, find people that you like to follow and look at who they're following. But are there other strategies that you all have for connecting with diverse communities or connecting with influencers or other forms of connection that you've tried to develop through your social media platforms?
Well, I think connecting again helps if you kind of are yourself, right? And you will naturally find the people who have similar interests. I think that, what one thing that happened on Twitter after some of you may know, I a little famous for COVID. And I was, one of the first patients here in Salt Lake to be in the ICU for COVID. I tweeted about it and probably got about 10,000 followers overnight from that. And and one thing that happened after that was that I started just tweeting about life in Salt Lake right during the pandemic, and I got really hooked into kind of local Twitter, like people who were big on Twitter in Salt Lake and kind of in the sports community here and kind of other local communities, the restaurant communities, and that kind of really was interesting and exciting because then I could share my interest in local things with others. And the interesting thing, of course, is that that whole community, none of that moved over the blue sky. So it just basically um, my community's just split once all the academics left X Twitter. But you just gotta talk about what you like to do. You just gotta talk about what you want people to know about, and they'll find you.
Did anyone else want to add to that? Or Kyle, were there any other questions?
I really do think a big theme was connection. So if there's any other thoughts that you all have, that seems to be a big theme in the questions.
I'm sorry, say that again, Kyle?
If you have any additional thoughts onto what Clement said or what you said earlier, Brian, I think a big theme in the questions was about connecting with people. Like, how do you develop those concrete connections?
I think it takes time. I'll just add that it takes time. I mean, I've definitely been in situations where I met a lot of people that I didn't know, and this was back in Twitter in 2010 and 2011. And especially when I was starting first with football. Um, and I've become real friends with a lot of those people. I've met a lot of them in person, almost all of them in person now. And so it takes time, and so be patient. But if if developing connections is important, then I think echoing a lot of what you've already heard from Clement and Brian in terms of being authentic and engaging. Engage with accounts that you're interested in, and be patient. Post things that you're excited about, and yeah. I think people are open and interested in connection. Um, that's why we do this mostly. So,
Just a quick example. This is on Instagram. I post a lot about food on Instagram, and I've met a lot of the local food kind of whatever influencers or whatever in on Instagram, and I've almost met none of them, but we DM a lot about things and direct message. And now like they'll repost some of my stuff. I don't follow any of my students on Instagram, but now they're saying how they can't escape me even in their social media where I don't follow them because they see my stuff getting reposted. And so, it's, you have to just engage with people, you know. You just have to, leave comments and comment on other things and that kind of thing. You just have to do it.
And, people are fundamentally interesting. There used to be an NPR reporter named Alex Chadwick, and he had a shtick where he would pull somebody off the street and pull a story out of them. And people thought it was a setup, right? That he was like pre-finding these people and the story would emerge. But the reality is no, he was just a good narrator that pulled people's story out of them. And everybody's interesting in one way, shape, or form. And so I think if you like tap into that, that's where sort of the sincerity comes from. And everybody's got something that they're interested in, or some aspect of them that is interesting, and that's fun to tap into, and it's sort of the long game, right? It's the fun part for me is getting to know somebody over years, and more information comes out about them, and like my friend Aaron D'Souza, he's a search guy at Google. He's one of like 12 people at Google that search comes down to, but he's also a phenomenal photographer and an amazing jazz percussionist. And these things like come out over the years, right? Like, holy crap. So that's the fun part of social media for me is learning about people over time.
Well, that concludes everything. I just want to thank Brian, Kristen, and Clement for joining us. And there are so many questions we didn't get to, but thank you again. And if I'm hearing everything correctly, we just all need to get on social media and start sharing and go from there. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.